Next on AM 1480 WLEA, the Newsmaker Show. Here's Brian O'Neill.
Everyone is always glad when he's here. Alfred University Political Science Professor Emeritus, Dr. Robert A. Heineman.
That's very kind, Brian. Very kind of you, yes.
Oh, man, I didn't leave myself any wiggle room there. Did you notice?
No.
That was an absolute one.
That's the way you are, Brian. Yeah.
All right, let's get going. A caller on one of the talk shows yesterday made an interesting point. The caller identified himself as a government official from Washington who does a lot of escorting around of high-level government officials. And this caller said, if you're physically near a higher up, you're not supposed to listen in on phone calls and discuss it with anyone unless the need arises, and then you talk about it with the supervisor, but that's only if needed. And the caller went on to fault the witnesses who testified in the impeachment inquiry this week. The caller said they shouldn't not be listening in and going public with what is normally considered to be what you call a privileged phone call. Your thought?
Yeah. No, I think that's true. And I just think, generally speaking, and I think we probably should speak in general terms about this whole impeachment fiasco, to put it in a broader context. But clearly what you're seeing is sort of the revenge or the attempted revenge of people who really don't like Donald Trump, and they don't like the direction he's pushing American foreign policy. And so they're searching around desperately for some way to bring him down. And Mr. Schiff, of course, is doing everything he can to achieve that. And I think what we're seeing here, and I think the American public can see it as well, is this relationship between the Schiff Committee and the majority on the Schiff Committee and the media. So Wednesday, when Mr. Sondland was on, which was really quite a comic relief effort there, I mean, that really is almost worth watching for a while. But apparently they called a halt after the first part of his testimony, and the media carried a bombshell testimony.
Schiff went out and held a press conference.
Right. I mean, and after Sondland began to deal with the Republicans a little more directly, some of the networks had to back off on some of these crazy statements they'd made, so that the media carries statements or claims that really mischaracterize pretty much completely what Sondland said. And
it was premature, and it was what they wanted to be true.
Exactly. And so you see this huge buildup here, and I think the American public can see increasingly how far-fetched much of this is. So the point I think I would make here is, I guess the second point would be this claim of bribery. Somehow this involves bribery. Now, nobody anywhere, as far as I know, is yet to make a claim that somehow Trump insisted upon some sort of quid pro quo. Clearly there was not. And even Sondland in his testimony was saying, well, what Trump was holding out was a meeting in the White House with Zelensky. Is it Zelensky? It's Zelensky, I guess. Zelensky. Okay, fine. What's the big deal here? But the broader picture is, I think, pretty clear that, as Mr. Trump says again and again, that Schiff is clearly trying desperately to come up with some sort of tangible evidence of wrongdoing. Now, going back to the whole bribery claim, and of course they upped the ante there with the bribery claim, if you look at the Supreme Court decision, I think it was U.S. v. Nixon, discussing executive privilege and Nixon's right to refuse to testify as to conversations, and his close associates having every right to refuse to testify on conversations they've had with the president. In other words, in that case, the Supreme Court established that there is a constitutional basis for executive privilege. There's nothing in the Constitution on it per se, but their view is the president has every right to confidentiality in his conversations. And obviously in the area of foreign affairs and intelligence, that would be even more important to have. But in that case, the court held that the president didn't have any exemption if there was some sort of criminal proceeding underway, so that he couldn't use his executive privilege to impede a criminal proceeding. And I think what the Democrats are trying to do here desperately is to show that there's a basis for some sort of crime here, or some sort of criminal activity.
Right.
And they have not been able to come up with any kind of clear definition or statement of that to this point. So the whole thing is kind of a exercise in make-believe, or as Mr. Sunland said again and again and again, I presumed this. It was my presumption that this is what they wanted. Give me a break. So I think we've got to watch for that, and I, frankly, we'll see what else Mr. Schiff has to dig up here. But I thought the Republicans did a very fine job of laying out some very strong points. And so if this ever does go to the Senate, I think the Republicans have done a pretty good job of putting the Democrats back on their heels.
Can I ask a question here, Doc?
Yeah, sure.
Trump was put in a situation with the whole Ukrainian thing weeks ago with the rumors of the phone call, where he felt he needed to release a transcript of the phone call with Zelensky from Ukraine, wondering, is a precedent being set here where this president or other officials, and possibly even trickling down to the general public, to start using rumors about phone calls as evidence? Could this lead to, a big brother spying not only on future presidents, but the general public?
I think you raised the question I was moving toward, really, and that is the big picture here is that the idea of being able to remove a president simply because you lost the election is increasingly becoming kind of an activity to undertake. And so that you've had Nixon, there were impeachment proceedings, you had Clinton impeachment proceedings, and now you're going to use this against Trump. And the idea that somehow just because you don't like a president or you've lost an election, so we'll put together some impeachment proceedings. I mean, this is a very bad way to go. And if you don't like the president, fine. Bounce him out of office the next election around, or get yourself majorities in the House and Senate and make his life miserable, which they've done a pretty good job of, I would guess. But the point is that you reach back to one of the this article in the Constitution is in there in cases of really serious misconduct on the part of a president. And it should be in there. I mean, there should be a means, a legal means for dealing with those sorts of situations. But the idea that you can simply begin to throw together charges of one sort or another without any kind of direct confirmation, etc., well, we'll get the guy. We'll just keep hitting the press again and again and again. And, of course, you get these pseudo-intellectuals out of the Northeast and Washington, D.C., who are coming up with all kinds of nuances and twists to try to make Trump look even worse. And the idea that somehow, well, we'll just impeach the guy or her, I mean, that's just not what the Constitution was intended to deal with. And unfortunately, as you're suggesting, it's becoming more kind of a common approach. And that can lead to some very ugly results. So hopefully people will begin to get their heads screwed on right here and begin to think little more in terms of specifics and actual legal consequences and actual actions. Are there's some clear actions here, one sort or another. And again, one of the problems you have with Trump is you've got a businessman in there who isn't used to using the sort of inner circle political approach that everybody inside the Beltway uses, whether they're Republicans or Democrats. He's from outside the Beltway, and his approach is quite a bit more aggressive.
Doc, I had another question here. Are the Republicans now being allowed to ask questions and make statements? Is that because we've gone into impeachment inquiry mode, or is that because of complaints of unfairness on Schiff's part?
Well, I think the fairness situation really hurt the Democrats. And so now he's making some sort of effort to let the Republicans have some say. And some of the comments by the Republicans have been pretty devastating in that respect. You can see that it's taken Schiff, it's hurting him. So what's going to come out of this, and nobody can say at this point. Schiff, of course, has to pass this on to the Judiciary Committee, and the Judiciary Committee's got to decide whether they want to send impeachment articles to the floor for a vote. And I don't know what those articles are going to say. I mean, if you're talking about bribery and extortion and things of that sort, I mean, that's insane. That's just insane that they're going to make some kind of claim like that. But they may well do. And I got to believe that's going to hurt the Democrats quite a bit down the line. But then you have the other aspect of this whole thing, Brian, and that is that if it does go to the Senate, then you've got, 6 Democrat candidates for the presidency are going to be tied up for quite some time dealing with something which is pretty much an exercise in make-believe. I just don't think they're going to be eager to have the House dump it in their lap. And so let's see if there's going to be some inside work there between Pelosi and Schumer and Warren and Sanders and some of these guys, and suggesting, look, you've tried to make your point here. You've got a lot of publicity on it. Now maybe we could just kind of let this move off into the background. We'll just have to see.
It was, one point was very interesting in the hearings this week. EU Ambassador Gordon Sondland, in the morning, he said that there was definitely a quid pro quo. But then when Congressman Jim Jordan, the Ohio Republican, was grilling Sondland Wednesday afternoon, Sondland was really grilling, Jordan was really grilling Sondland and got Sondland to admit that there was not a quid pro quo. That's huge. Now, a lot in the media didn't pick up on that, but that's a huge thing.
Well, they didn't want to pick up on it. That's the point we're making. The media took the idea that Sondland is establishing a quid pro quo when he had no evidence whatsoever of this. It's just that his presumption was that this is the direction it was meant to go, etc. Now, one of the problems, of course, is you have Rudy Giuliani running around in there, and who knows what Giuliani said and done and what kind of high-pressure tactics he was using. Frankly, I can't.
He needs to go.
Yeah, I had questions about
Trump. Listen to this show.
Trump. Who knows what Giuliani and Trump have in other areas going on. But wherever Giuliani goes, things do not turn out well. Although he did do a good job as mayor of New York City.
Well, he's in a different element now, and it works for Trump to get out of his element, but it's not working for Giuliani.
Again, Trump is a businessman. Takes a totally different approach toward what government should be doing and how it should be dealt with. And, of course, as our listeners know, I'm sure, the Supreme Court has put a hold on the attempts to force his bankers and such to release his income tax. So we'll see how far it looks to me like the Supreme Court will be issuing a decision on that, which means we'll have to have hearings, arguments, and deliberation. But again, if Trump is forced to release his income tax, I mean, I think that shuts off any business person from wanting to run for the presidency. No one who's been in business for 15 or 20 years or whatever is going to want to feel that somehow they've got to turn over records from their businesses. I mean, that just immediately cuts out most of the business people in the United States. And so we could talk more about that, but at any rate...
Doc, you mentioned the Supreme Court. If the Republicans get a lot of lawsuits into the courts, lawsuits against the whole impeachment process and Russia collusion investigation and Schiff and Pelosi, etc., because of the one-sidedness that we've seen, if the Republicans take it to court and lose to liberal judges, is it possible that a precedent could be set for the kangaroo court type proceedings that we've seen to trickle down into everyday America?
Well, I don't know quite where you're going with that, but I do think that the Democrats are correct. There's nothing in the Constitution telling the House how to go about holding impeachment hearings and inquiries. So they've got quite a bit of freedom there, and they're obviously using it. And that's where we get back to the whole fairness thing. The basic elements of fairness were missing pretty strongly there with Schiff's original approaches, and he's backed off on some of that. But, you pick on Schiff. The point is, you go back to McCarthy and the House Un-American Activities Committees and places like that. There have been plenty of other instances where congressmen and senators have really abused their authority. And Schiff, I think, falls in that basic mold. So, at any rate...
That's interesting you compare him to Joe McCarthy.
Well, if he had a chance, he'd carry it even farther. Although it is true, with McCarthy, there were, in fact, communists in the State Department. And he probably had the names of quite a few of them. But we needn't go into that right now.
Can we quickly touch on the debate and then get to Epstein?
Well, sure. Was there anything else we wanted to say about the...
Yeah, one thing. Oh. Senator Lindsey Graham's been saying that Attorney General Barr is going to be releasing a report about how the FISA courts were abused during the Russia collusion investigation.
Yeah. Well, I do think there's some other things coming along here that are going to make the whole impeachment thing kind of awkward for some people. And the whole FISA, Russia collusion effort here, and maybe some things popping out of the Mueller investigation. And I don't know, maybe some of this Epstein stuff will come bouncing in to affect some of these people in the House and Senate. Although hasn't seemed to be much there in that respect. So would you want to talk about the debate or...
Yeah, my first observation, if you look up the New York Times, I find this very not interesting, but maybe hypocritical on the Times' part. They were making cheap shots against Hawaii Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, the way she was dressed. The Times said Tulsi's white pants outfit was not winning. Now, is that what you take away from a debate?
Well, I don't know. Given the quality of the debate, that may be the most important point. I'm not sure.
And the quality of the Times.
Yeah, she certainly, but she certainly stood out on the stage up there with her white outfit on. I'll give her that. No, they don't like her.
Yeah,
they really don't like her.
What a stupid observation.
So that she got under the skin of Kamala Harris and who was it? Somebody else. Oh, Buttigieg.
Right.
Who makes big claims about his veterans status and such, and of course Gabbard is a veteran as well. So
on that, Mayor Pete slammed Tulsi Gabbard, saying Gabbard met with a Syrian dictator Assad. Tulsi slammed Mayor Pete back, saying you have to meet with both friends and enemies. What are you talking about?
Yeah. No, she's capable of taking care of herself. She's outspoken. She's fairly conservative, and she keeps things riled up rather nicely, I would say. So where all this is going to end again, the impeachment efforts here, one aspect of them, of course, is that the Bidens keep coming up again and again and again. And so it may well be to Joe Biden's benefit as well to try to prevent this from coming up on the floor of the House, where the House or the floor of the Senate, where the Senate could in fact subpoena witnesses and things of that sort. Joe may find himself under oath there.
Biden had a number of gaffes at one. He had. I don't want to repeat them all. We all know he's done this kind of thing for years. How is it he does so well with all these gaffes, Doc?
Well, I think first of all, he's a pleasant enough fellow, and second, the argument is continuing that he can draw some of the former Obama support from the black African American community. And I guess that the polls do tend to show that. So you've got Cory Booker and Kamala Harris in there trying to claim that they represent people of color, et cetera, et cetera. And I guess they do to a certain extent. But Joe seems to have the considerable support in that direction. So he's managed to hold in there. And I think one of the problems and the worries that Democrats have is that he could well end up getting a nomination. This whole primary season is really topsy-turvy at this point because Buttigieg seems to be doing very well in Iowa, and the claim is, well, Iowa's mostly white, middle-class, kind of homogeneous constituency, and then New Hampshire sort of the same. So where do you get the black support that's going to give you the Democrat nomination? And that's not until you start hitting places like South Carolina and some of these areas, Super Tuesday. And as our listeners know, Bloomberg is avoiding all these early primaries and is waiting for Super Tuesday, thinking he can pour his money into Super Tuesday and gain a considerable number of delegates there. And he might be able to. I don't know what kind of PR firm and such he has lined up, but who knows what kind of chaos is going to be swirling around the Democrat primary by that time. I wouldn't count him out.
Winding down on time here, the Jeffrey Epstein guards arrested this week.
Yes, and one of them has suggested that she's more than happy to cooperate with the FBI. So there's more to be heard here on the Epstein case. A couple of points we should make. One, of course, Prince Andrew now clearly is moving off into the sunset because despite his half-baked attempt to absolve himself in this interview with BBC, I mean, the guy came off looking like a total fool, and claiming he'd never met this 17-year-old, or 17, I think she was. They got pictures of him there, and plus I think there's probably other material there that's going to involve Prince Andrew. And he's not going to be the only one by a long way, I think, who's going to end up getting involved in this. So the first question is, what happened to Epstein himself? The second question is, what kind of criminal investigation are we going to have on the people who are involved in his pedophilic activities? And it turns out, of course, that in his building in New York City, he had all the toilets and all the bedrooms filmed, so that they had
blackmailer.
There's got to be film out there on this unless somebody's destroyed it. And you can imagine what kind of films they got from his island out there in the Caribbean.
Ugh.
So again, where is his sidekick? What's her name? Ghislaine something or other?
Yeah.
Who has been accused of
Helping out.
Yeah, obtaining.
She's the recruiter.
Right. That's what she's accused of. Where is she? Why are we not interviewing her? And if she gets, I'm telling you, there's a lot to be dealt with here yet. There's got to be some people pretty nervous.
With that, we've got to go, Dr. Bob. As always, thank you for stopping in.
Well, see if you can get hold of some of those films for us, will you, Brian?